I am very proud to have served with the few, the proud, the Marines. The evolution of such a person, his character, his quiet honor, and his core beliefs comes from many experiences that shed a unique light on something called truth. Truth can change with geography and can change with history and time, but one's inner truth in war is searing and more clearly defined. This definition of truth runs deeper than a spectator's definition. Perhaps my joining the Marines was a positive, adding enormous amounts of clarity for my soul.
So, thank you for bringing that quote up. I hadn't seen it or heard it in a long time, but basically it came back to when I went into the Marine Corps, and before CHIPS and before producing and all the other things that I've done in the film business, I ended up in Vietnam. And I was sitting in Da Nang, Vietnam in 1967. And I was reading Life magazine about the 9th Marines getting the you-know-what kicked out of them and blown up and bloodied and bandaged, all on the DMZ in an area called Con Tien. And then sitting in that old red dirt waiting as Marines were getting off C-130s and helicopters, and many of them bandaged, heads covered, eyes covered with gauze. And I'm thinking, oh, man, I'm going into this nightmare. And they read my name and my serial number, which I won't repeat on here, but Wilcox. I was 18.
Wow.
And so they call my name and my serial number, Wilcox Con Tien. I went, oh, man, I don't want to go to Con Tien, right on the DMZ. And so we got in a C-130 and flew up to an area called Dong Ha and then to Con Tien, and cut to the quote. So what happened over the next 13 months is that, we all learn a combination of disorders, psychological disorders, according to their books, if you will, everything from denial to transference to you name it. And as those layers complicate themselves and put various layers on the onion, if you will, it often never gets unpeeled. And as a result, you meet someone who isn't really who you think they are. They've learned to acclimate and or adapt. And war puts you in a different circumstance. It strips you naked. And the reason is because it just shows your raw weaknesses and vulnerabilities and, of course, strengths. And Marine Corps helps a lot with that, is training you to be resilient and tenacious and show heart and strength and insight and even intellect at times, but more importantly, compassion. And so when you are exposed to death or traumatic injury and screaming and yelling and crying and blood and explosions and every kind of sensual effect to your trauma centers and trigger centers are taking place, and you begin to discard all your former swag, your former identity, your former lying to yourself, all the camouflage and lipstick that you've used to be something with some self-esteem and identity of your past. You're just nothing except your soul, which to me is really your God. God is there then. And when you're that naked and that vulnerable, or others are, you see that this individual is either going to be there for you or cower or remove themselves from the conflict mentally or physically. And you see a lot of different characters under those circumstances. When a guy's walking point, his first day in Vietnam, he's usually the first guy that's going to be assassinated. It's a scary time, he's extremely vulnerable, and it's okay. It's good to be scared. that false bravado will help a little bit, but not for long. So, what I meant by that, long story short, is that when it strips you naked, you reflect on yourself and what you really are, and your inner belief in yourself, and your prayers to God to say, put a golden shield around me. And if it's my time, God, take me. But if it isn't, I'm going to work my butt off to survive this under the worst possible circumstances. And the other thing is, you have to make sure that rage doesn't overtake your body, because watching your fellow men get killed or hurt, or bushwhacked in the bush, causes rage inside you. And rage and emotion get in the way of logic, and that's why Marine Corps training and SEAL training, if you will, is mostly about logic and a little about emotion. So stripping down somebody to their raw nature allows you to either perform or not perform, and then who to align with in the future, because that strategic alliance may dictate whether you're here tomorrow or not. Yeah. So that's kind of it.
Yeah, and that's what causes. I haven't served, and I appreciate your service for sure, especially in the war situation. But that's what makes lifelong brothers, right? Is that you're out there not just living together like frat brothers, your life depends on each other. It seems like veterans, especially war veterans, come out as lifelong comrades, friends. There's a brotherhood there from what they experience that nobody else would understand, even if they hear the stories. And it seems if they can adjust back to normal life with the post-syndrome issues and facilitating back into work and family in a normal frame of mind after that, the ones that can seem to have a very strong faith, because you're faced with mortality from the get-go at a young age. Would you say that's accurate?
I think so, yes. I think that that camaraderie, if you will, is doesn't happen initially. I mean, boot camp's hard enough in the Marine Corps, very difficult, very physical, and and sometimes violent. And when you're done with boot camp, you feel like you passed the grade in some respect. And we had the whole spectrum of people in the Marine Corps and boot camp, good and bad, people that shouldn't have been there and people that should have been there. People that were there because they wanted to wear the dress blues, and that's all, and shouldn't have been there. But, they were physically and mentally punished to make sure that they were ready to confront that issue, their issue, and of course the war issue. But that camaraderie, I think, that happens, and it happens out of time honored. It's either time honored or it isn't. I always tell people, my sons, that, make sure that you let time honor your signature, because words don't mean anything much anymore. And so show that your signature is time honored. It's a template. So that's what happens I think in the military, is each person earns a reciprocity of respect. And that's a great feeling when you have that faith and that trust.
Yeah. If you don't mind, I'm going to read something else that you wrote. And
Okay.
You're very insightful. I'm a fan, and unless I haven't seen it, you haven't written in a while. But this one's from 2015, and
all right.
I'd like your response to this. You wrote in a blog article, "For me, the church is good soul cleansing. It provokes and probes you. It does not mean you are saintly or better, but it is good for all people, including children and parents. I often wonder why people do not discuss philosophers more. I often wonder if they ever dig deep into their pain crevices of their brains. I often wonder why people seem to handle talking about Freud and sex, but get nervous when you talk about Jesus. His writings are really a simple blueprint for life, yet we run from such direct or indirect suggestions. Now it is politically correct to say God, but do not say Jesus. Or on the other hand, you can say spiritual, but never start saying Jesus. Ladies and gentlemen, come on. Take a moment to read, probe, and ponder some of the words of Jesus. Take some time and attend some various religions and listen. You don't have to be anointed. You don't have to roll on the floor. You don't have to be reborn. You don't have to become a Jew or a Christian or whatever. But the probing of your soul and the harvesting of your thoughts is nurturing your energy and your being. This is your signature resonance. That last line, this is explain a signature resonance and what you meant by that. I love it.
Yeah, I forgot about that also, but thank you. Well, I'm a real, first of all, I'm a real big believer in self-reflection. And, self-reflection is about readdressing and cleansing your system, if you will. I often tell my children that, your reality are your choices of thought. So why do you choose that reality? You wallowing in your misery, or are you going to find a solution? And as a result of that, I think that I actually made a kind of a sarcastic joke today on Facebook, and I said, this old guy, Joe Blow. Joe Blow often says something, and I said, I don't know about Joe Blow, but it seems like people have misunderstood what love is anymore. What happened to the word love? I mean, Joe used to say something about faith, hope, and love, but now we have bro and dude and hey and other profane names, right, which I won't go into right now. And my whole point was, Jesus said all this stuff. If you get caught up in saying Jesus, unfortunately, he's the author, and that's number one. So if it's easier for you to allow me to call Joe Blow, I'll say Joe Blow and talk about Corinthians 10 or 11, right? And I'll whatever you want. But my point is, it's simple. Just go there and allow it to cleanse you. Now, to answer your question, your resonance signature, which I actually like those words. I forgot I used them. But your resonance is really important. That's that spirit, that rhythm, that those cycles of amplitude that you give off out into the world of who you are, sometimes simplified in the word karma. They feel that karma, that energy coming from you. And, as a cowboy, we used to always look at a horse and say he has a bad eye. And be careful when you get on him. And usually those horses had a lot of white in the eye, and they were very dangerous, right? And with a person, you look at them immediately and you know if the resonance signature is there or not. And you may not know immediately that it's God's resonance signature, but it sure infers such. And that resonance signature makes you want to hug that person and feel good about being vulnerable and honest, candid with them. And I think it's a great statement about where we all should be and need to be for peace, joy, and love.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, that's beautiful writing and words and response. So obviously, your for those listening that weren't around watching television in the 70s like I was, there's the A-Team, there's Chips, there's only a few things you watch because there wasn't cable television. During the day, soap operas, then 6 o'clock news. And so you only had 8 till, even by 9 o'clock, you're getting warnings that your kids should be in bed. You know what your kids are doing. And so, it was a big deal to watch a television show. So you waited every week for it. And Chips was one of those. So John and Ponch are iconic in American culture. So you've been identified with that, and you seem to have embraced it, it looks like, through your life, and not shunned from it, which is fun. And I appreciate you being on. But I'd like to end the time asking you this question. Mm-hmm. I can't imagine that at the end of the day, if this was your last day on earth, your last few minutes, you would reflect and think, I sure hope I'm remembered as a great John Baker. But as Larry Wilcox, in a reflective moment like that, I know this is pretty intense, but about to breathe your last, what do you hope, not that people remember you by, but what do you hope that you lived, that you felt like your life you did right?
Good question. First of all, in Christian history, often they talk about you can't rule your country if you can't rule your state, and you can't rule your state if you can't rule your city, and you can't rule your city if you can't rule your family, and you can't rule your family if you can't rule yourself. So, I'd like to think that I I didn't consummate 100% of ruling myself, but a large percentage, I would say, that I learned to govern myself is really what the word was, not rule. And so I think I governed myself with the goal of being a good father. And I think that if I could make my children, my offspring, better human beings than myself, then I had accomplished something. So that was the first. And I think I did that. I think the children are, I don't like to talk about my children because they have private and individual lives, but I think I, made them, the most important word is empathetic. They understood empathy, and it's very important. And I think I was an empathetic and always will be an empathetic person. I care for human beings, and I care for their struggle and their pain. And so, in one sentence, what do I think I want to be remembered as is, a good father that was empathetic to mankind. That's, when I did a lot of things in my life. When you read my bio, I got a lot of merit badges, I call them. And for a long time, I chased merit badges. And I thought, wow, you did this and you did that, and you did this, all these things that I thought I accomplished. And as you get older, you realize that's really about lack of self-esteem or conflicts in your personality. It doesn't mean anything. What means anything when you look into someone's eyes and they sparkle with the love that you put on them, and vice versa, in God's love, if you will. So that's all there really is. Show empathy, show love, put your signature on your life so that people trust you, and understand forgiveness, because the other just harbors dissent, anger, and illness.
Outlaw.